Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I'm your host, Wendy Nystrom. Today's special guest is Jenny Kassan. She is the founder of the Kassan Group. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. And I've kind of been on the thread of VC funding and women and people of color and leveling that playing field. But what I loved about what you had to say is you don't have to sell your soul to get funding. So could you please talk about your background before we dive into funding for people?
Yeah, so I fell into the world of getting businesses funded by investors in a very circuitous way. I went to law school and I got really interested in community economic development while I was at law school and ended up going to work for a nonprofit after law school for 11 years where I did a lot of it. It was focused on a low income neighborhood. I worked with the local small businesses. We did a big real estate project. And a lot of beautification and things like that. But I just got really passionate about the small businesses and just saw how incredibly challenging their lives were. And I started to explore, why is it that some businesses are so under-resourced and other businesses are so flush? The big giant multinational corporations seem to have a never-ending supply of funding to do whatever the heck they want, whereas the vast majority of businesses in our country struggle to get any capital at all. Most of them don't even consider trying to get capital because they don't know how they would do it. The capital that they're aware of isn't a good fit for them. So I started to really explore that, and I found out that there are some businesses that have raised money in really creative ways. So one of my favorite examples is back in the 1980s. Ben & Jerry's was a startup ice cream company, and they really wanted to raise money. They needed to raise money to open a factory. And they said, let's raise money from our community, from the residents of Vermont. So they hired a lawyer who figured out the right way to do that without breaking the law. And they were able to raise $750,000 from Vermont residents. So that has been happening for a while. It's been quite under the radar until recently. It's now the idea of investment crowdfunding has now become a lot more well known, but this was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so I decided to leave the nonprofit and start a law firm and devote my career to figuring out how to support small businesses with fundraising from people in their community, their customers, their supporters, their fans, in a way that didn't break the law, and then also structure the arrangement in a way that is more patient, more friendly, more supportive. Because oftentimes when small businesses seek funding, the funding is really not a great fit. Like, it's often debt, and the debt often requires a personal guarantee and collateral and monthly payments. And that's really not a good fit for a lot of businesses. First of all, having to put your personal assets at risk for your business is really scary. And
Terrifying.
second of all, a lot of businesses, they don't start making money right away. If you don't have like steady cash flow, you can't deal with debt, and you probably wouldn't be eligible for it either. So designing investment structures that are really, customized to the business's particular plans and strategy and projections so that everybody wins. We don't put the seeds of the business's destruction in the fundraising strategy.
I mean, it is funny when we're, talking, everyone relies on venture capital, VC funding. And they say, okay, just pitch to 12, 50, 100 different companies. Maybe someone will give you something, a little seed money to get started. And the problem with that is they now own a part of your company. You lose that control. And to some people, that's totally cool, totally fine. They're okay with that. They want that. But most people that I know that are small, entrepreneurs and startups, they want that. They want to maintain that control and they bootstrap it. And that's hard because you have to have a savings that you're relying on, or you have to have perhaps family members willing to give you a interest-free, forget about it loan. But what you do, I don't think most people know that that's possible, what you do, that it is an actual viable avenue to do crowdsourcing or crowdfunding from your neighbors. I love the fact you even said fans, because a lot of people, maybe it's not necessarily a product, maybe it's messaging, maybe it's what they do, and more people want that content, that information. What would you, What would you recommend for somebody, one, to gain the confidence to go out and approach people? Because that's a scary thing to do. And putting together, I guess, like a package of, trust me and
Mhm.
work with me and how you work with them to get them there.
Yeah. I mean, first, I think it is important to bust some myths about venture capital. A lot of people think, like, oh, if I'm going to go get funding for my business, I could either go for the bank loan, which we already talked about often is not a good fit, or I could go for venture capital. And those are the only two choices besides bootstrapping. But venture capital, it's only a fit for a tiny, tiny percentage of businesses. I think there's something like 5,000 checks per year, and there's millions and millions of companies out there.
Yeah.
VC is only for a very specific situation. If you happen to be, first of all, let's be honest, 98% of the money goes to white men.
Yep.
So if you're a white man, ideally you have a degree from like MIT or Stanford, and the thing that you've built is a technology company and or possibly consumer product. But that's challenging, but it has the potential to grow and become like a giant company very quickly and then get sold to a larger company. So we're talking a tiny percentage of companies that are a fit for that. So the minute you kind of realize that, you're like, okay, well, what other alternatives are available? Well, guess what? The vast majority of investors in our country are not venture capitalists. They're regular folks who have it's actually 99.7% of the investors in our country are regular folks who are investing, maybe as part of their retirement plan, or they have some extra money that they're putting maybe into the stock market. And so just realizing how many trillions and trillions of dollars are out there potentially available to fund your business, if you find the right people and you structure it in a way that that you can explain to people. So that's why the very first thing we do when we work with folks is help them figure out, what really should I be offering to my investors? Should it be some type of debt? Maybe not the type of debt that is so extractive like bank debt, but maybe there's something called revenue-based debt, something that's
Hmm.
a little bit more flexible. Or maybe it is equity, but how do I structure the equity so I'm not giving up any control? None of our clients give up any control to their investors. So we figure out, how do you structure it and get really specific so the entrepreneur can talk clearly to their potential investors, not just about like, hey, invest in my business, it's really cool, but also specifically, here's how you will get paid. And I have thought this through. I think that gives investors a lot of confidence. I personally, because I like to kind of eat my own dog food, I've raised money myself 5 times. I've raised over $2.5 million. And it's not always with crowdfunding. Sometimes it's through what we call a private offering, where we're not necessarily having hundreds of investors. Like, I'm raising money right now, and we have 23 investors, and we've raised 1.2 million.
Oh, wow.
It's not crowdfunding, but it's a similar concept in that we are offering the opportunity to everyone we can think of. We are, and of course, there's definitely legal rules you have to comply with, and you want to pick the compliance strategy that fits your particular situation. But being able to show that you've really thought it through, you've designed something that is specific to your company, you haven't just grabbed some off the shelf document. Um, I think that makes investors very intrigued. Many people who invest maybe never have invested in a small business before. Maybe all their money is invested on Wall Street, but that is often very exciting to them, to have the opportunity to take some small percentage of their portfolio and invest it in a company they love.
Yeah, and supporting, the people that you already know or your community, or, if you're in your retirement age, maybe you knew this kid who was always bright and really energetic and wanted to do something to change the world or do something better. And you said, you know what, I'm going to throw a little money their way. I know they're really working hard. And that's the key, is finding the people that are working hard right now. Because, there have been some negative stories in the VC world of people who have wasted billions upon billions of
Yeah.
dollars in dumb things. I will refrain from specifics, but we've seen some mistakes being made, and statistically, I'm glad you brought up the fact that less than 3% of VC funding goes to women, and about women of color or people of color get, I think, less than 0.5%. And that's a tragedy because those two demographics actually turn a profit more often than not. So they have a very good return on your investment. And that's just being ignored. I don't know why, other than racism or preconceived ideas. But helping people get through that and not selling your soul. I love the fact you actually wrote a book about, getting funding without selling. I forget the full title. Forgive me for that. What is the name of the title of the book?
Raise capital on your own terms, how to fund your business without selling your soul.
And I love that because some people feel like they are selling their soul if they, pitch to other people and lose that control or have to answer to somebody else of how I want to do my product or my business. And the whole point of people starting their own thing is so they can build their dream, follow their dream. And you yourself have a very long pedigree of achievements. You have done quite a bit. You've started several companies as well. So you actually know what you're doing. I do want to transition over to, if you're okay with this discussion, there was an article recently that there's a man out there who overturned the affirmative action ruling. And he said it was discriminatory. And in reality, it actually helped people than hurt them. He's also now looking to go after VC funds that help women and people of color. What's your take on that? Why is he's calling it discrimination? Why is it discriminatory or is it just helping people?
Yeah, I mean, it is really frustrating because so much of the attempts to, for example, there is this thing called the Fearless Fund, and they are focusing on Black women, and this guy is now suing them for focusing on Black women. And, organizations like the Fearless Fund that focus on people who haven't traditionally had access to funding, they're doing it because, I mean, there's just a massive history of racism in our country and, slavery and legally sanctioned discrimination. And then even after that was declared illegal only a few decades ago, continuing to this day, de facto discrimination, even though it's no longer sanctioned by law. So,
Yeah,
and there's tons of evidence for that. So these the laws about civil rights were designed to remedy that. And for a white person to come along, a white man to come along and kind of use that as a way to prevent anyone from doing that kind of thing is very frustrating. I mean, these laws were not designed to be race blind. They
yeah,
were not designed to protect white people. They were specifically designed to remedy, centuries of wrong. So
yes.
it's very, very frustrating that this person has chosen to do this with his life. I'm sure he could do something much more productive with his life, but the good news is there are still ways that we can vote with our dollars, and this is why everyone who does have money invested, and a majority of people in the U.S. do have money invested, mostly on Wall Street. If you took, maybe 2, 3, 5% of your portfolio and invested it in things you loved and chose to maybe give a little bit more consideration to non-white male business owners, that would be legal.
It
This
was
guy
illegal.
cannot come after you for doing that. So we have to double down. We can't wait for some white knight to come along and solve the problem because, from a legal perspective, it's getting harder and harder to do things that you know uh, openly favor those who have been disadvantaged by
Yeah.
centuries of discrimination. Um, so it's all the more reason why we need to use our own money to remedy the wrongs that we see.
And bringing up the Fearless Fund, and I've interviewed other VC funds that focus on women and women of color, people of color. They are opening a door that has traditionally been locked to them. So when someone says, well, that they're being discriminatory, that it's not being fair, okay, if you want to go that route, then let's focus on the VC funding as a whole and require them that 50% go to, that it gets evenly distributed amongst everyone. And
Yeah.
that's not happening.
I
And
know.
that's not being
It's
questioned.
totally legal for VCs to put 98% of their money into white men, but this guy is going after this tiny little fund. I
Yeah.
do wanna say, though, that, as wonderful as it is as that there are more VC funds trying to focus on women and people of color. it- let's remember that VC is not a fit for the vast, vast, vast majority of
Very
businesses.
true.
And honestly, I don't want to say this in a way that makes it sound like, oh, women are lesser than, like women aren't as entrepreneurial or women aren't as innovative, but it's just a fact that when women start businesses, they tend to start businesses that aren't as likely to be, and I don't know the data on this, and I don't know how big the difference is, but women are more likely to start businesses that we call like steady growth
Yeah,
or
I
regular
can see that.
growth versus men are more likely to start businesses that are focused on the super high growth. And again, there's tons of exceptions on both sides,
Yeah.
but it's just a fact that a lot of women don't want to push for that growth at all costs. They care
Very true.
about so many factors of making their business healthy and sustainable that their projections end up being a little bit less of a hockey stick and maybe a little bit more of like a slow hill climb, and that they
Safer.
shouldn't be punished for that. Like, we shouldn't say that that's bad. Like, we shouldn't say that success is measured by fast growth and then an exit to a big giant corporation.
Yeah.
Those businesses tend to actually have a higher rate of success because they're more realistic. They're not relying on some big exit to actually pay their investors. So,
Yeah,
you
they're
know,
absolutely slow and steady, and women are more nurturing. I mean, it's just in our nature. We want to
yeah,
see
so
something
let's find
grow.
funding for that type of business instead of saying like, "Oh, we need more VCs to fund women and people of color." I mean, that's important too, but let's not forget the vast majority of women and people of color owned businesses and white owned businesses too, that are just not a fit for that type of
Yeah.
funding.
No, we want that slow, steady, healthy growth because, as you said, with the hockey stick, that often comes with a crash. I mean, you sell, you get out, and then it just falls
Yeah.
apart. And
Well, and
then,
most of them never even have exits. I mean, there have been
yeah,
studies
that's
that show that the average VC return is actually negative
oh,
because it's
okay.
based on this hope for this big unicorn
Unicorn.
event, but that doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. You're absolutely right. Most VCs, I mean, the unicorn is rare, hence the name unicorn. But no, I know many women that have started their own businesses, every race, background, sexual orientation, whatever, and they want that slow, steady growth. Make sure it's being done properly, so it's sustainable, and
Mhm.
that they can actually do it right.
And
Sometimes
take care of all the stakeholders, not take
yeah,
advantage of their workers, not take advantage of their customers.
yeah, and keep the quality. If you're selling a product, the quality is very important because one woman I know, she owns a face cream company. Beautiful stuff, Violet Botanicals. And she was been approached by the big boxes, and one of the things she learns, the second you give up your product to them, they dilute it, they take out the good stuff, and they use
Mhm. They
less of it.
replace it with the cheap, crappy chemicals
Yeah,
that
and she's like, I'm not
haven't
going to
even
do
been
that to my
tested. Yeah.
product. She's like, I'm not doing that.
Exactly.
Her product is pure. I mean, it is the best quality stuff you can get, and it's 100% pure. There's nothing diluted, and it's fabulous. And she's not giving up her quality.
Good
She's like, I'm
for her.
bootstrapping it
Yeah,
myself.
there's so much pressure to do that. You know, it's just the number of companies that started out like so amazing, and then
Oh, yeah.
just got diluted because of their investors pushing them for an exit.
Oh, yeah. No, I would buy products, and 5 years later, I'm like, it's different.
Exactly. That's what happened to Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Odwalla. Oh my God, that was a terrible.
Oh, yeah. What happened to them?
Their
I,
investors pushed them to sell basically, and it got sold to Coca-Cola. And then lo and behold, it completely failed, because it just wasn't the product it had been. I mean, I used to love Odwalla, and then the quality started to go down. Ben and Jerry's, it's just not what it was. Back
back in the
in the
day,
90s, I used to go to Vermont and
I
try
went
the
to Vermont in 2002, I think, because I'm from Michigan. We didn't have Ben and Jerry's. It wasn't until I went to school in Boston. I'm like, what is this stuff? It's amazing.
exactly. Yeah, and they did not wanna sell it, but their investors pressured them to sell it to, Unilever.
Unilever. Yeah. I don't eat as much sweets as I used to, so I can honestly say I haven't had Ben& Jerry's in a long time.
Don't bother, it's not very good.
Well, good to know. But, so closing out, how do people find you to work with you? Because you are offering a much needed service for people that they just need the roadmap. They need to figure it out.
Yeah, well, I do have a website at jennycasson.com. And then my book, even though it did come out about 6 years ago, it really is still pretty correct. There's a few updates, but there is a website that talks about there's been a few changes to the law, but yeah, the book is really helpful in terms of understanding this very different approach to funding your business.
And it's important to learn that roadmap and also the legality of it, because no one wants to get stuck doing something they didn't know was wrong. Because not,
Exactly.
I'm not going to know what's legal, what's not. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a freaking geologist.
Right.
You want to talk rocks? I can talk rocks, but
Yeah.
law, I can't.
It's
And
called
that's
securities law, and it's very complicated. And the SEC is going after people that did bad things in 2017 right now. So, it can take a while, but they will eventually catch up
they'll
with
get you. Well, the greenwashing was a real thing. I called it out because they weren't hiring environmental people. They were hiring. I mean, I get it. You need finance people. You need accountants. These are smart, brilliant people. But you need the environmental people to say, this is actually what it means. And this is how it needs to
Exactly. And
happen.
that is such a great example of where the investors can really get in the way of, often people start with the mission of, oh, I really care about the environment. I really want to do things right. And the investors come in and they chip away at that, but they still want the messaging to be the same. And it's just terrible. It's
Yeah.
terrible. So yeah, we need to prevent that.
No, we do. I mean, I remember the first ESG report, environmental, social, and governance report I read. I'm like, oh, cool. And I read it like, they've got all these great plans, but they don't say how they're going to do it. They just say we will be carbon neutral by X date. But how? We don't know.
Right. Exactly. And the SEC is, trying to address those claims of public companies. And as you know, many state attorney generals are pushing back on that. But yeah.
True. Well, we need people like you, Jenny. And guys, please check out Jenny Kassan's Kassan. And her website is jennykassan.com. It's very easy. So look her up, use her services. You're definitely helping people do the right thing and find their pathway to entrepreneurship. So
Thank
thank you
you
for
so much.
that. Anytime. So guys, Wendy Nystrom, your host with Environmental Social Justice, our special guest, Jenny Kassan, jennykassan.com. We'll talk to you guys later. Take care.